The satanic essence of evil wreaks violent and revolting revenge. He was Captain KRONOS, vampire hunter, to the death.
But it weren't human, sir.
Forged for your black heart.
Oh, God, I prayed I'd never see that again.
Yes, you bleed, my lord.
That's what they call the devil's skin.
Witchcraft is dead and discredited.
It is commonly supposed that a vampire attacks in only one way, by biting the neck and draining the victim of blood. The girls you spoke of, they were not drained of blood, but of youth, of life itself.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare, from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon, we decide on the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we've been doing for a few months now. So if you haven't made the jump yet, there's a huge back catalog of episodes just waiting for you back there. I'm your host, Josh Lewis. I'm going to start trying to do this because I literally haven't done it for months. And I mean, you probably know it's fine, but I'm Josh Lewis, and joining me, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. How you doing?
Yep.
Welcome back.
Speaking of on-air shoutouts, we do have one patron who we forgot him for 2 recordings in a row, but Bob Biggs, he's joined us.
What's his name?
Bob Biggs.
That's an amazing name.
Yeah, he's been watching. He's been listening for a little while, but he finally made the jump not that long ago, and he's getting all those bonus episodes right now.
Well, thank you.
So thanks for joining us, Bob. iTunes listeners, you're out there. Rate us. Give us a review. That's it.
We'd appreciate it.
All right.
Help us climb those ranks.
Thanks so much. Those are your plugs for the week for the free listeners, because we don't give any plugs to the bonus people.
Yeah.
But those are the plugs. I think the last time you guys would have heard from us would have been 2 weeks ago, free listeners, where we would have had Leslie Lee of the Struggle Session podcast on, and we were talking Kill Bill Volume 2.
Yep.
And
finishing off the series.
Yes, we did a sequel to our Kill Bill Volume 1 and Female Prisoner number 701 episode that we did really early on in the show. I think it was like episode 3.
Yeah.
So it was a long time ago now, earlier in the year. So we did a follow-up where we talked Kill Bill 2 and Lady Snowblood, the other Meiko Kaji Japanese 70s exploitation flick that she made, and she's incredible in both of them.
Yeah.
Either way, if you haven't listened to that episode yet, or even the first Kill Bill one, go back, check them out. They're there. They're available for free.
And we went ham on those ones too.
Yeah, we went pretty long.
I think we went like 50 minutes.
We went pretty long.
Yeah, it was awesome.
But last week, patrons, this would have been when you guys heard from us, to celebrate the release of a new Mission Impossible movie. Which we haven't seen yet because
we've heard good things.
Because we record this episode early. Just assume that I have a take on the Mission Impossible movie and it's online somewhere. You can find it right now.
Yeah.
I probably loved it. Maybe I hated it. It's out there.
Yeah. By the time this is up, then it will be.
You will know the take by the time this is up. But as of right now, I haven't seen it. But last week, for patrons, we did talk Brian De Palma's original Mission Impossible film alongside John Woo's Mission Impossible 2 of the films a lot of time that I feel now, back when we recorded, I felt like they were getting a little under discussed when it came to the Mission Impossible franchise. People seem to think that John Woo one is the worst one, but I'm like, dogs, nah. I love both those filmmakers too much to not, and both those filmmakers exert so much of their own style and control over the franchise in their entries before Tom Cruise's more producer-heavy kind of
his hands-on
thing has come in, which I do like too, but it's very different. If you go back and watch De Palma's or John Woo's and you watch Rogue Nation, you were like, this the same franchise?
Yeah, for real.
Other than the fact that Tom Cruise
the tones are all over the place with these movies, but they somehow still find a way to make them cohesive, which is nice and rare. I find.
It's neat.
Yeah.
It's neat. Either way, if you guys want that episode, it's over on the Patreon. We talked about it last week. But this week, we brought another special guest on for you guys. And his name is Scout Tafoya. Scout, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course.
No problem. For those of you that don't know, Scout is a film critic and an excellent video essayist with his series The Unloved that he does on his Patreon, and sometimes you might see it on RogerEbert.com, where he talks about all kinds of forgotten and misbegotten cinema. It's one of my favorite video essay series currently out there that you can find. He loves sometimes talking about trash and things that weren't appreciated as much as they should be.
Which
so
is perfect for this
if
show.
you like this show, you'll
This
probably
is the
enjoy
show.
his video essays. So make sure when you finish listening to this, you go and check those out.
Yeah.
But Scout, you've brought 2 films along with you this week, and there's been a couple episodes where people have brought on films that I haven't seen before, but these ones I literally hadn't even heard of.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
So would you care to introduce the pair that you've brought with you?
Friends, I have brought with me 2 of my favorite English folk horror classics. I brought Captain KRONOS, Vampire Hunter, and The Blood on Satan's Claw. These were films that I knew of sort of by reputation before I had ever seen them. The Blood on Satan's Claw was a film that I read about in a handful of blogs like 10, 15 years ago when I was first discovering both the internet and the vast knowledge of weirdo horror from before I was born. When I read the description of both of them, I knew that I had to find them as quickly as possible because there were premises that I could not pass up. One of them is about a village slowly after the discovery of a piece of fur and bone on the edge of a village, and the other one was about a German mercenary hunting vampires with a sword in...
Yeah, I'll be honest, reading that description got me pretty fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, on premise alone, these films are trash legend to me, but they are also both pretty excellent movies in their own right. So it's a win-win.
Cool. Well, I think we're just going to jump into it. Usually we do the most popular or the more well-known one first, and doing a little bit of cursory research on this, I found out that technically Blood on Satan's Claw is going to get the edge there. More people had actually logged that I had seen.
Which I'm surprised
Really?
by.
I was a little surprised by it too, but when I looked it up, that was what it said. Now, not by much. I think it was like 2,000 people on
To
Letterboxd had
3,000.
logged Blood on Satan's Claw, and like 1,000 for Captain
Jeez,
KRONOS.
1,000. Oh my god.
Which
that's
was surprising
amazing.
when I found out that Captain KRONOS was technically a Hammer horror film, which was
Yeah,
actually
that's right.
like a well-known production company that made horror films.
I feel like we're in an exclusive club now. This is kind of
Here we go. There weren't a lot of people reviewing them, so anyway.
Well, when we get to Captain KRONOS, we can talk about Hammer's legacy in the 70s and the
we
fact that I
absolutely
really
have to
want to make
address.
a sequel to Captain KRONOS. If somebody
Yes.
would give me $10 million, I would make Captain KRONOS Rides Again.
I heard that they tried to make it
Yeah.
a franchise. So,
Oh man, I would
yeah.
have killed for a detective vampire
It was
hunter.
supposed that was they
swashbuckler.
hired Brian Clemens, who was the creator of, or at least one of the most prolific writers on the Avengers, the TV show. So yeah, they turned to Brian Clemens, who was an Avengers guy, and they said, "Give us a franchise like the Avengers, but for horror." And he dreamt up Captain KRONOS for them. And it really should have been more popular than it was. Some people blame Horst Janssen, the lead, for its lackluster box office performance. Which
I don't
is
know.
fair
He's
enough.
pretty hunky.
He's great.
He looks good on a poster, I'm sure.
It was great with him holding the sword like that. It was wonderful.
Totally fine.
I don't know. British audiences, they drive me crazy. They said no to basically everything that Hammer did in the 70s, and for that, I just don't know. Because there's so many
Goddamn
great things.
Brits.
Anyway, we can get into that later.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
For sure. We definitely will.
But yeah, I guess we'll do it. We'll just jump right into The Blood on Satan's Claw.
Oh yeah. So metal.
It's a very metal movie.
I think thou could be saved.
These dogs know how to tear the devil's heel.
Oh, telltale bitch, thou set the dance on me. Of course I didn't. Art thou ready to give thy skin tonight? Art thou ready?
Blood on Satan's Claw.
All right. Well, we are talking The Blood on Satan's Claw, the 1971 British folk horror film made by Tygon British Film Productions.
Tygon Studios, that's right.
That's the one. And directed by Piers Haggard.
Yeah. Tygon and Amicus were the only credible competition that Hammer Films were offered in the late 60s, early 70s. Tygon really didn't hang around all that much. I think they made a couple of movies and basically went under. Amicus put up a stronger showing for themselves because they had the omnibus movies, which audiences loved. They did Tales from the Crypt and Asylum and a handful of other things. Tygon's biggest claim to fame, I think, ultimately is The Blood on Satan's Claw, which is a dubious claim.
Witchfinder General.
Witchfinder General. Did they do Witchfinder General?
They did. I just clicked on their thing, and apparently they did do Witchfinder General, which it's another sort of 17th, 18th century British sort of folk. This one's a lot more folk than Witchfinder. But I really loved Witchfinder.
It's essentially it's not folk horror so much as it's folk superstition. It's Vincent Price able to capitalize on the fear that everybody in England has for witchcraft and witchery and devilry.
What drove them in the 70s to want to really reckon with that history?
It's I don't know. It's interesting that essentially in the 70s there was, I don't know, there's obviously Nixon, which is a huge thing, but it's also like I don't know what was going on politically in Britain that made the witch movie as popular as it was, but there was quite a bit of it. I mean, from 1964 until 1976, there was all this fascination with devil worship and the occult in English horror films. Michael Reeves, who directed Witchfinder General, also made The Sorcerers, which is one of the great films about sort of modern witchcraft and devil.
Interesting. I haven't seen that one. I have to check that one out because we watched Blood on Satan's Claw, and Blood on Satan's Claw is interesting because in direct opposition to Witchfinder General, it makes the supernatural a lot more overt than Witchfinder General does, because Witchfinder General is specifically, it kind of takes all of the occult and actual supernatural Satanism out of it, and it just shows you sort of a world where people are using people's fears and superstitions to abuse them and to sort of heighten their own ranks on people. So it's a dude going crazy with power as the dude hunting witches and just basically calling everyone he doesn't like a witch and burning them. It's
interesting how much there are two different leaps in logic required for both films. That in Blood on Satan's Claw, you have to sort of take evil at face value, which is fascinating because very few films ask you to do that without getting into the weird in-between of representation being the same thing as, like, condoning what is happening. This is obviously a pre-woke era kind of movie where they don't ask you to think that witchcraft is real. What they ask you to do is imagine what would have happened if the devil had actually come back in the 17th century. Whereas Witchfinder General, I think, a little ahead of its time in imagining that people who have authority over, the sort of forces of nature and evil and get to things whatever they want them to be, those guys do exert power and control over everybody else. Or at least, they can if they abuse the authority they've been given. Witchfinder General is a little more prescient and also probably a little more timeless than Blood on Satan's Claw in that way, because it shows what you do. If you're a crazy person given a little bit of power, you can get away with anything.
Yeah, what it kind of asks is, why are you afraid of Satan when people are going to do basically things just as apocalyptic and brutal as Satan would if he was here? Whereas Blood on Satan's Claw, which we'll kind of jump into, is what if Satan wanted to take physical form in your village. And from what I understand, this was meant to be sort of like 3 short stories that were end up sort of put together.
Oh, and the screenwriting credit sort of hints that it was a couple of ideas sort of stitched together, and you can tell because the film very clearly, segments itself.
Yeah, that's one of the more interesting elements of it, because I think honestly, for me, the most interesting character in the movie kind of disappears for like 40 minutes of the movie. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. It's but it kind of opens right with a local field worker finding, unearthing a body.
Barry
a hairy body.
Andrews. Barry Andrews looking for all the world like Roger Daltrey. Everybody points this out. He was in a couple of Hammer movies too. He was in a Hammer Dracula. And a handful of other things, and he was the actor who looked most like Roger Daltrey from The Who. So he plays Ralph Gower. He's tilling a field. This is a film also, by the way, that gets the details of English pastoral life in the era of witchcraft in the English Civil War, like very, very well, like spot on. All the language is very, very precise. Lots of vows. It's a terrific period piece. Regardless of what its treatment of the occult, it gets details of English life, before Cromwell, pretty spot on. In the fields, and he finds a piece of bone with a still moist eyeball inside of it, and it freaks him out so bad he goes to find the local visiting judge, who's come to basically hit up an old girlfriend of his for shelter for the night. And they go up there and they can't find it. The thing has disappeared, because that's the sort of devilish logic that, it'll make itself known to people who are filled with superstition, but not to anybody who could credibly do anything about the threat presented by the devil. And then,
so that was what's kind of interesting, is it immediately sort of sets the judge up as the more skeptical, the more pragmatic person sort of there.
Right. Well, the interesting thing is you expect Patrick Weimark's judge character to sort of be the villain in a kind of Vincent Price as Matthew Hopkins in Witchfinder General sort of way, but he sort of wends his way into being the hero of the piece, which is very unexpected.
Yeah, it is an interesting turn, which is why I find his arc really interesting when he comes back in the third act of the movie. I was the most invested in him. The
Harry of Witchfinders.
Yeah, exactly. Because as they sort of, there's weird things happening in the village now that this body has been unearthed, where Satan is around and trying to take physical form and sort of manipulating the kids.
Yeah.
Kids these days is kind of the tone that it takes a little bit.
And ironically, one named Angel.
Kids, man, they're into Satan.
Angel.
They just love him.
Right.
They love Satan. Okay, like, come on, what are you going to do about it?
The kids love Satan. It's like a perfect pre-Columbine movie in a way.
Them in their 17th century metal music,
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Just ripping it on the loom.
Yeah.
Did you guys not love the score? That great, jaunty sort of like flute and xylophone score.
Absolutely.
That was one of my favorite parts, actually.
I think one part that stood out to me specifically was when Peter is about to open the attic door. There's these like really sporadic flutes that are going on. Like it's kind of it's almost it's quirky, but it's still creepy enough to set the tone, and it's very, very odd in a way. But
there's
works well.
There's something there. There's something off kilter going on here.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the tone he was going for. Something where you're intrigued and you're curious, but you're also kind of hesitant. You don't really know what's to come. So yeah, it's a really well done score.
There's something fiendish and unnatural lurking around the corner.
For sure.
Well, it's this awesome thing where they give you the idea that Satan has a bizarre sense of humor, because the thing that time and again in the movie, somebody will see something that doesn't look right, and your like eyes don't have enough chance to sort of register what they're being shown. And then a couple of scenes later, that person will be presented with that same idea. But I'm thinking specifically when, the young master sees his girlfriend carted off to the madhouse and she's got the claw for a hand. And then that same claw attacks him and he hacks it off and it's his own hand. There's this.
Yeah, that's a brutal scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty gnarly and very metal. I love it because it hints that the devil has a sense of humor. Which I love. I love the idea that, you're at the mercy of someone who will torment you, yes, but in a way that is very specific, ironically, to, who you are as a person and who you have most recently shown yourself to be morally.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bit where he is hacking at the furry hand. And I was like, "Oh, dude, no, that's your hand, man."
Yeah,
and then, that was
I had that vibe.
And then when they come into the room to check up on him, because obviously they hear some sawing and chopping sounds from the bedroom and a dude screaming. They're like, "Something's
afoot."
Yeah, it's really, so Angel is the girl who gets possessed, and that was the bride to be in the opening sequence, right?
No.
It's not?
The bride to be is Tamara Ustinov, Peter Ustinov's daughter, I want to say. But no, Angel is played by Linda Hayden, who was sort of a cause. She was sort of like she was the Miley Cyrus of British cinema.
Oh, okay.
Fair
She
enough.
was
Seems
sort
like an
of
appropriate role.
She and her husband were they were famous for being this bunch of famously exposed people, and she had a short career as the gal that like British audiences would go to watch take her clothes off at the cinema, which is not totally fair to her talent. She was an incredibly talented actress. I mean, you can see just in the scenes, even before they paint the weird eyelashes on her, like her scenes where she has to, kind of convince. I think she does a very good job at that. She like the scenes at the funeral when what's her name, Kathy, looks behind her and sees Angel Blake spying on her. Just the intensity of her eyes, or when she's trying to seduce the Reverend Fallowfield. There's
That's a great scene.
Yeah.
I love the moment where the Reverend is very clearly, she's a beautiful girl. He's looking at her. And at the same time, he's immediately ashamed. Like 1 second later, he was just like, and he's so mad that she's like done this to him, basically.
Yeah, made him feel this way.
Yeah.
He can't just do the normal thing, which is to like immediately send her on her way. He has to like think about it.
Yeah.
Be like, Christ, do I want to do this? What day is it? Is it Wednesday? Maybe not.
Yeah.
Has a real come to Jesus moment when Angel Blake takes her clothes off in front of him. But that's the beauty of the movie, I think, ultimately, is that it presents this enormous smattering of moral conundrums for people who are used to being above them. You've got this guy, the priest, who sort of imagines that he has it all figured out, and then the minute the devil actually comes to town, he kind of isn't ready for it.
Well, it's the same thing when Angel sort of starts getting a crowd of kids involved in these ceremonies, where they're now. I'm not sure I completely followed exactly what they were trying to do, but I know that they were trying to create a physical form for Satan. But I wasn't sure if they were trying to do it by latching onto people's bodies and having him in there, or if they were just trying to take parts of it.
Well, the best I figure is that Satan comes to town and decides who are his servants and who are his vessels, in a way. The people who are sort of the most innocent are the ones that he'll latch onto and give the furry skin to. And Angel is the one in the community who can tell the difference between, the people who are ready and the people who are more easily taken advantage of. And so, the people who won't join the cult are the ones who get the hairy skin. And they have to cut the hairy skin off of the non-believers in order to attribute it to their satanic master as he builds himself up. I get the feeling that Stephen King must have seen this movie because he steals little bits of this in a lot of his different stories. But that's the best I can figure.
That's how it goes. They take the hair and then they got their building block.
Yeah.
As
for the vessel thing, there's one scene, and it's when they have the group all together of basically all the teenagers or the kids or however old they seem to be. I was kind of unsure. They seem to range, but it's the scene where the girl is getting raped by the guy. And at first I thought this was going to become like a, this is the ceremony so that the devil can be born for real or something like that. But it ends up just being a rape scene and a stab scene, and I was a little confused.
Well, because
by that.
I think that they were.
So I was expecting the vessel thing.
Because that's what I thought too. But then they cut the hair off, right? Because that's what they were actually aiming for.
Right.
They were trying to get the
sacrificial knife.
Yeah, so they needed multiple vessels so that they could get little chunks each time out of them.
Oh, right, because it's in different body places, right? Like,
yeah, so because they got the hand off the guy because he cut it off himself,
right? And
then they got a leg, and then they got in the end they're trying to get something off of the main villager dude, because he's sort of the last guy who has hair growing out of him.
That's right. Yeah, Gower. That's what's his name? Ralph Gower, played by
Yes.
Barry Andrews, Roger Daltrey.
And while the kids are kind of, trying to build up Satan and kind of amassing a bigger and bigger cult as they go along, obviously a lot of the villagers and the parents are getting a little worried, but they can't really act well, or they don't really have much of a response to Satan coming to town. They didn't work out safety precautions or anything for that.
They never sat their kids down.
no
Judge, someday Satan
call.
might come.
Yeah, so the judge is off for the entire second act of the film, off reading about Satan, so he can figure out how to kill him.
Yeah.
And honestly, I kind of wished that we got a little bit of like when Gandalf goes to go read about Sauron kind of deal. Like I wanted
back. Is it secret? Is it safe?
Exactly. Like I wanted a little bit of finding out what he learned and what he and what he was doing over there, because I think there's clearly something missing, and I don't know who to attribute this to, but essentially there is something missing between the judge coming back to town and them attacking the devil with that sword, because the sword shows up and suddenly it's a thing, but they don't actually figure out what the I think it's a more interestingly written film than it is a thoroughly directed film. That sounds right to me.
I think there's some stuff missing, and I think among them is the what did the judge, what conclusions did the judge come to while he was away reading the book on the occult?
Well, because that's what's kind of interesting, is because as we sort of get into the third act and we talk about the climax a little bit, which is a big sort of cult ceremony where they have officially brought Satan back, and all the kids are there, and all the adults are kind of coming in around them to put a stop to this. And the judge at this point has come back with all of his learned info on how to take down Satan. And at that exact moment, they are trying to sacrifice the young villager kid, basically. Yeah. Who's got the last piece of hair on him that Satan needs. He needs that hair. But in this moment, I thought was actually the film ending was one of the strongest parts of the film for me. I loved the bit where
it kind of just answered it and then took it away.
That was just
story's over.
Like they were that we've clearly built up that this is it. Satan is going to be reborn. All of the work that the kids have put in is for this moment right here. And the judge comes in with all of his learned info, and he takes his sword and he just sort of maniacally skewers the shit out of Satan. And that's just it.
Even
he throws him in a fire. Yeah,
he picks him up, he throws him in the fire, and the final shot of the movie is just his determined, satisfied face literally in flames at having just killed Satan. And I think that that's such an interesting arc too. In the first act of this film, you see this very sort of witches don't exist, you dolt. Witchcraft is dead and discredited.
He literally thinks everyone's an idiot.
And he's very clearly a non-believer. He's very clearly a pragmatic judge. And this movie ends with him literally skewering Satan in a maniacal finale
with pure satisfaction.
Yeah, and honestly, I was really impressed by the ending. Although I did think that they had one cut to the kid's hair thing being gone, and they were like, "Oh, it's gone," and I was like, "Oh." All right, well, this is a little pretty easy solve. It's like the sort of take the mothership down kind of thing. Yeah. It's all gone. I thought Satan would have a little bit firmer claws than that,
Yeah.
Most of the film's sort of narrative inconclusivities can probably be chalked up to budgetary problems.
Yeah.
All things considered.
Yeah.
But I think that's sort of why the film, endures after all is said and done, is because the weirdness permeates beyond anything else. Whatever else is true of the movie, it is one of the strangest films to get made, with, clearly a fair amount of money was spent on this thing. The costumes and the swords and props and all there's a lot that they sunk a lot of resources into here, but it remains one of the oddest movies ever produced.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it was definitely I did not anticipate where this movie went. That was for sure as it was unfolding.
Oh, same. I remember this was a film I read about when I was very young, and then I think I found it on eBay. And we ordered the VHS tape, me and my dad, when I was very young, and it came to the door, and it was almost like it was basically unmarked. So we watched this unmarked VHS tape that I bought on eBay, and
this sounds like the beginning of The Ring. This is The Ring, right?
Yeah.
It's in the beginning of The Ring, because then you watch it and you're just like, where the shit is this going? This is nuts. I've never seen anything like this, and it just keeps getting weirder and weirder and weirder. And I was so grateful that a film like this exists. And
it is interesting because it does sort of that. Also, the fact that it's not clear necessarily about all of the things that people discover, and the fact that it is so sort of like shaved down does result in that weirdness effect where you're kind of like, I think I understand what's happening.
They give you just enough to fill in some blanks, but then there's stuff to be left for the imagination.
The ending has no, conclusive. I mean, the fact that it, like, when he pulls the sword out and then you see that freeze frame on the assembled crowd, and then everything that afterwards has this weird slow-mo quality, kind of like you're watching somebody else's nightmare. That's what's so great. It feels very inconclusive, the things that it's showing you, and whether or not it's a dream or it's somebody's interpretation of what happened. And it also feels like the adaptation of an arcane text. And I just, every weird, kind of unresolved corner of this is unendingly fascinating to me. I love a film that behaves by no normal, Western dramatic rules. It's very much out there on its own.
Totally. Well, I think we're going to enter the reductive rating round on this one. So, Scout, for you, the reductive rating round is the part of the show where we take away all the words, take away all the nuance, and for bookkeeping purposes on our ongoing list, we give the film a rating out of 1 and 5. For me, I'll go first here. For me, it is a very high 3. I was close to the 4 on it, but for me, I actually just watched Witchfinder General for the first time, like shortly before watching this one.
Sure.
And I also actually, for completely unrelated reasons, also just watched The Wicker Man for the first time, the 1973 Wicker Man. And so I was actually just caught up on the sort of major, the major hits of the folk horror 70s.
Yes. Did you see what's it, Peter Watkins' film Culloden? Did you see Culloden?
No, I didn't see that one, but I'm gonna check it out because I have liked every single one of the films that I've seen so far. But what did happen with Satan's Claw was that I did appreciate a lot of the weirdness, and I did appreciate a lot of what it was going for. Especially liked the ending, but having just finished Witchfinder General, which kind of ends for me similarly, but even better, with just sort of like blood in a stairwell, and just like these two people screaming, basically about how things, they did sort of finish off the dude who was abusing witchcraft for his own means, but the sort of the ongoing pain of what he caused is never going to leave any of these people, and that, I think, I felt a lot more thoroughly. And I mean, The Wicker Man, of course, obviously is a little bit more psychological, or at least subjectively psychological. And
The Wicker Man is like 80 minutes leading up to a 10 minutes, perfect ending.
Yeah, a brutal ending. And
I mean,
I guess when I was watching Satan's Claw, I was just like, man, I see all of the potential here, and I was just hoping for, I guess, a little bit more psychological out of it, and I was a little disheartened that sort of Satan just kind of gets finished and it's fixed, although you are right that the actual sort of lingering consequences are sort of left vague. Especially with the judge character, who he seems like a changed man. I'll say it. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. But for you, Scout,
I think for me, I go full 4 because essentially what you've got is it's a reverse Wicker Man. It's
that's actually kind of true.
It's like an 80-minute perfect setup to a kind of okay ending versus Wicker Man, which is an 80-minute okay setup to a totally perfect ending.
Yeah. If you've never seen The Wicker Man, by the way, the ending to The Wicker Man is unbelievable.
You got to see The Wicker Man.
Nick Cage one.
Basically.
Yeah. It's a really trippy, interesting movie, regardless. But both of those films are very, very invested. Witchfinder General and The Wicker Man is neither of them nail down the supernatural element. They're more interested in the psychological destruction of people and society based on these kinds of mythic hysteria and superstitions and stuff like that.
Specifically, the things that you choose not to believe because they seem sort of beneath you, which is very interesting. That the stuff that you
and the sort of power it has over other people.
You won't allow your subconscious to deal with later comes back to bite you, which is a very interesting idea.
Mm-hmm. But for you, Jamie?
I'm going to also give it a 3. Mm. It's a high 3. I really don't know what it is. I think both these movies I was kind of comparing to a more modern film, The Witch. Just because it has that folklore and it's 17th century.
They were filmed. The Witch was absolutely inspired by a lot of these movies.
Yeah, I can tell. And I guess with The Witch, you get so much visual stimulation when it comes to the imagery of the devil and Satanism and all that kind of stuff. And this movie does a lot of cool things. It just doesn't hit me as hard, I guess. It's more of a subjective thing, really. But yeah, I'm gonna give it a 3. And also, I just wanted to make a note. I really enjoyed the shot when the girl is walking through the forest alone, and then all of a sudden she's just surrounded by all the kids. It's the angle that he chose for directing it. It just gave me this really creepy feeling of if I were in the woods, and then all of a sudden you're just 360 degrees surrounded by a bunch of Satanists. It was just a very cool image.
Pierce Haggard, I think he not for no reason did he not become sort of a famous filmmaker. I think the most high profile thing he did afterwards was direct Peter Sellers' last performance and take over from a movie that Tobe Hooper walked off of. But I think Pierce Haggard...
Was that Venom? Because I've never seen
Venom. That's right, yeah. I think that there's something to Pierce Haggard's sort of amateurness as a filmmaker. Amateurness is not a word. I see it better.
I do it all the time. No problem.
But I absolutely understand what you mean. That there is sort of like a
the fact that he is sort of making up the rules as he goes. I think really works in his favor in some cases where the naivete that he presents a lot of what happens, I think, does make things seem a lot spookier than if they were kind of workshopped to death. It's the reason that a lot of Hammer horror films from this period aren't as frightening as they should be, because they've too thoroughly studied the playbook by which horror movies are meant to behave. Whereas this movie doesn't really follow anybody's rules. I mean, the language is different and the direction is a little more heavy-handed. Pierce Haggard, I think, is probably imagining what horror movies are meant to do, but he doesn't really know because he hasn't directed before.
Yeah. It's definitely unlike. I don't think I've seen a movie like it. So in terms of
overwhelmingly the impression is that whatever its faults, this is a movie unlike any other movie, and I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, between the structuring and the way that some of his set pieces work and stuff like that, I was just like, this is a strange movie.
Both of these films give me that vibe of I think I'd get more out of it if I watched it a second time as well, and a third and a fourth. It just seems like there's a lot of subtlety to them, and there might be some imagery. Maybe I missed
one little subtle shot that actually my girlfriend pointed out while I was watching it. She was like half watching it in the corner while I was watching it. The one where there's a shot where the sort of like villager kid is freaking out about the hair that's growing on him, and framed in the background is like these sort of like boots that are hanging off the roof. And the first thing that she kind of spotted was she was like, is that a hanging body? Because they are moving back and forth looking like and I was like, I don't think so. I think that's just boots. but when I sat there and watched the image, it lingers on it for a long time, and I was like, wow, that actually very much
putting it into your brain kind of thing.
It's sitting there. It's very clearly intentionally put in frame, and it's the only thing moving in frame that's not the character.
Yeah.
So it's very weird. But a neat little moment. But anyway, I think that's going to be it for Blood on Satan's Claw. I think we'll just jump right into Captain
KRONOS.
Captain KRONOS.
KRONOS?
KRONOS is how they say it in the
KRONOS.
movie,
Oh,
but I
okay.
think that Canadians say it KRONOS.
Yeah, that's just how it's spelt. So
I read it Captain KRONOS when I first read it, but every time they pronounce it in the movie, they say KRONOS.
Oh, okay.
But either way, the dude's a vampire hunter.
Yeah, let's watch some. Let's talk about some hunting.
Captain KRONOS.
To the death. Yes, you bleed, my lord. This is God's blade. Forged for your black heart.
All right, we are back, and we are talking Captain KRONOS, or KRONOS, whatever your pronunciation is.
Yeah, whatever you prefer. That's how.
Vampire
The point
hunter.
is, he's the captain of vampire hunters.
He is.
right.
He's the captain of the vampire hunters. It is a 1974 British horror film written and directed by Brian Clemens.
This was the only movie he did, right?
The only film
thought
that
I
he
looked-
directed, but he wrote
He
a
only
lot of
directed,
Hammer.
but he was a very prolific writer.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. Because I just looked him up and it was the only film, and I was shocked because it's pretty well directed. I really enjoyed it. So
Yeah, so
he was very, very plugged into not only the zeitgeist of Hammer, but of sort of trends in television and things like that. I mean, he was a writer.
He wrote Highlander 2.
Yes, that's true. He
That's
did.
hilarious.
Well, he wrote some of what Highlander 2 became. I don't know that he's responsible for what actually happened, but he had been a writer since 1957. He wrote screenplays for movies, and he wrote a lot of TV.
So he's coming into this a veteran screenplay writer.
Indeed, yes.
And Hammer kind of was like, just go nuts, man. Like you've made hit shows clearly. Do you want to give us a hit franchise?
Basically, well, so to put this into context, essentially, Hammer films going into the 70s were sort of at odds. They didn't really know how to continue, how to press on.
Because Hammer got started in the late 50s, right?
Yeah, Hammer had been around for a very long time. They've been around. They kind of pick up steam in the late 50s and become,
right, because that would have been when they were updating like the big Universal monster pictures.
That's exactly
with
right,
sort of
yeah.
like updated budgets and updated coloring and updated
right.
gore
So
effects and camera movements and all this.
They join the sort of ranks of studios to be reckoned with in the late 50s. They'd produced a handful of things beforehand, and later they'd buy the Carry On series, which is a very, very popular. Not Carry On. I'm sorry. What is it? On the Buses, I think. Anyway, so they were a force in the English film industry for a very long time, and then in the late 50s they do a couple of things. They partner with Val Guest and Nigel Neal to make the Quatermass films, which are a huge deal in England because Quatermass was a very popular character, and then they make the Quatermass Experiment and its sequel, and then at the same time they buy the rights to the old Universal movies, which Universal had turned away from their sort of cash cows because they'd stopped making money for them in the late 40s, and had turned more or less into parody when Abbott and Costello kind of get thrown into the mix. So Universal sells the rights to Dracula and Frankenstein for a song, and the revenue generated by Hammer Films' The Curse of Frankenstein and the Horror of Dracula basically saves the studio from bankruptcy. So they
and it was Christopher Lee's Dracula, right?
That's
He
correct.
did one or two Dracula films for them.
Cool.
Oh, he did several. He did something like 7.
Jesus,
Oh, wow.
I've only seen 2, so
That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, that was He was Frankenstein's monster to Peter Cushing's Frankenstein. Jesus, listen to me. I sound like Hollywood Handbook. And then he was Dracula to Peter Cushing's Van Helsing.
right. They sort of brought Lee in as the Boris Karloff.
That's right. He was their Boris Karloff, but he was also their Bela Lugosi because he was very charismatic.
Mm-hmm.
There's this funny story about they're making I want to say Taste the Blood of Dracula, or one of the later Hammer Dracula films in 1966. And there's a shot where he's being sort of impaled by a giant spike on the ice, and his blood is everywhere, and blah blah blah. And they were doing a shareholders tour that day. So all these, very uptight English men and women are being, ferried around the Hammer Studios sets, looking at everything, and they see Christopher Lee down, getting stabbed to death by a stake for a Dracula movie, and a man turns to his wife and says, "Honey, that man's in my club." So these were like very respected people and incredibly well-respected actors who were doing these horrific parts because, not everybody could be Laurence Olivier. And even if you were Laurence Olivier, you eventually wind up doing trash anyway, because there just isn't that much work for dignified actors at a time when he is focused on, horror and exploitation. So Hammer buys these Universal titles and they buy themselves some respectability. And then...
Yeah, they sort of take those classic horror melodramas and they infuse them with the updated exploitation.
Right. They have a couple of things that nobody else had, especially when the Universal films were new, that they could get away with. They could get away with a lot of cleavage, and they could get away with the color of blood. That basically Universal kind of bows out of horror right around the time of Creature from the Black Lagoon, which still warrants 2 sequels, but never really kicks up the following that Dracula and Frankenstein did. But they didn't have color. And Hammer has color. You can do this great, brilliant, bright orange blood, which they pay tribute to in the movie Sleepy Hollow. Sleepy Hollow is one of the great Hammer film homages, not least because they get the color of the blood right, which is this grotesque sort of red-orange, the sickly, pale, perfectly English fake blood.
Oh, yeah. I love that, paint.
Yeah. Very. Tom Savini would call it melted crayon later when he was doing the commentary for Dawn of the Dead, because for years the fake blood didn't look like blood, but at the same time it kind of has a charm that you don't see in a lot of modern blood. Modern blood all looks the same. It's that too translucent, deep red color, which doesn't look like blood any more than the Hammer blood looks like blood. But anyway, Hammer going into the 70s has a couple of hurdles they need to jump. First of all, nudity. Everybody wants naked women because cleavage doesn't do anymore. The first Hammer film to have nudity, I believe, is called Pendulum. It's made in 1971. And they do the Hammer lesbian vampire trilogy, which is terrific. You should all check those movies out. It's The Vampire Lovers, Lust for a Vampire, and Twins of Evil. And then there's the thirst for gore. People want more, gore in their movies. And so, Hammer in the 70s is a very interesting thing between what they did and what they think they're supposed to do. And
you do get a weird cognitive dissonance, I think, watching something like Captain KRONOS, where it goes from sort of like this gothic romanticism very quickly into blood splattering walls.
Yes.
And I was kind of honestly, I was there for it. I was very enthralled by that sort of kind of clashing things in my mind, things that didn't belong together. But then I was like, wow, this feels very correct actually watching it now.
It still feels very cohesive. It doesn't feel like it's out of place. It just, you do notice things, but it's never oh, that doesn't serve this world or the story itself.
Well, that's just it. Is I was watching a thing and I was like, okay, so it's a little bit kind of like a Dracula style thing, and then there's a dude with a katana chopping people up, and I was like,
oh. When I noticed it was a katana, oh my god!
It's before Tarantino. It's that genre mashup thing.
Exactly.
People, they tried this again, by the way, when they made Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, is they understood that foreign cinema had made inroads in both England and America, so they thought by fusing sort of wuxia or the Shambara films with their stuff that they could kind of pick up two different audiences at the same time, not realizing that you had to actually come up with an organic reason for there to be the genre blending. And Tarantino never learned that lesson either, by the way. He just sort of threw all that shit into a blender and hoped that it worked. And that was very much the ethos here, where they're so thirsty for ideas that they think will work, because Hammer, by 1974 especially, are hanging on by a thread. They have no idea what people want anymore. I mean, especially in England. I mean, if you look at all the films released in England in between 71 and 75, there's no common thread to any of this, other than a vague trend towards postmodernism. But even that is sort of cagey as a guiding ethos. They
were throwing shit at the wall.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And the death of Hammer proves that there was nothing that you could reliably spend money on in the 70s in England and have it pay box office dividends. It was everybody was sort of...
Well, I'm curious how people would have reacted to Captain KRONOS, because it
Captain KRONOS didn't make money.
No? I could see that. Well, I mean, obviously they would have made sequels out of it if it did.
Yeah,
that's exactly right, because it was meant to be. They approached Brian Clemens, who had given British TV some of its most enduring characters and ideas and shows, and said, please save us. And he came up with Captain Kronos, which on paper seems kind of foolproof. You got the samurai thing and the vampire thing, and you got Carolyn Monroe, gorgeous Carolyn Monroe, as your sort of girlfriend character, and he's going to just, attack vampires, vampires.
And who doesn't love like a detective mystery style story? So you got all these things.
It's a little bit Sherlock Holmes and a little bit of Hunchback of Notre Dame. There's everything in this, and they didn't like it. People didn't come out for Captain Kronos. It was the reason there was only one. And the Hammer Studios, as we understand it, didn't last more than another 2 years. By 1976, they were essentially shuttered. They still did a handful of things. They produced a really excellent remake of The Lady Vanishes in 1979 with Elliot Gould and Sybil Shepherd, and they later financed the TV Hammer House of Horrors in the 80s. But by then, I mean, they were a novelty more than they were an actual force in the English cinematic marketplace. So Captain Kronos didn't perform the way they were expecting it to, which is a shame.
No. Well, and it's clear watching it, because I was obviously starting it basically right after watching Blood on Satan's Claw, and I was watching it and I was like, wow, talk about a budget, because Captain Kronos looks great.
Yeah.
I looked it up. They got basically double the budget to do that. And I mean, Hammer in general would have had higher budgets than something they would have been giving Piers Haggard in general. But at the same time, you're watching what sort of Clemens is doing, even with that budget, and it's a lot more formally sophisticated. It opens immediately with like images that I would border on saying are lyrical when I was watching some of them, like blood on. There's the quick sequence where there's the girl sort of smiling in the mirror, and then there's a cloaked figure in the mirror, and then it kind of goes out of focus, and then blood is dripping on the mirror. And it's piecing together a cloaked figure killing a girl, but that's a really sort of visually ambitious way to actually capture that, which immediately distinguished it for me from having watched Blood on Satan's Claw, which maybe isn't necessarily the most fair comparison, but as we were going...
Well, no, but you're not wrong, though, that there's an assuredness. I mean, you've got that beautiful Laurie Johnson theme, which has such driving sort of purpose, whereas Blood on Satan's Claw, I think, is much more an atmospheric piece. Captain Kronos announces itself in a very ambitious way, like you're saying, by having a couple of different strands up in the air at the same time. You've got the vampire turning young virginal women into old women via his, blood sucking, and you've got Captain Kronos and Grost sort of appearing in their horse and carriage. It's it's a lot to throw at an audience right away.
Well, and I thought that was kind of interesting, and I could see sort of like modern audiences, if they were to do something like this, I could see them going, well, those aren't real vampires, because they just drain the life out of things. And they were and that's what's sort of interesting that Cronus kind of sets up, is that there are all kinds of different creatures and vampires and different species of them that we can, hopefully sequels will show you all of them. And we started with this one.
I read that was the whole idea. There were going to be like a variety of vampires that had different powers, different looks, different everything.
Exactly. So. And with this one, they kind of opened on the sort of the very classical draining of youth kind of
which I
imagery.
Love too.
And
they actually, for the most
big
part,
old mansion on the hill and like
and for the most part, it seems like they get older women to play the older version, and it just gives this very real feel to instead of just like putting on a shitload of makeup on them or something like that. I actually really enjoyed the fact that they chose like 80-year-old women to pop up.
Well, it was a way around the sort of practical effects, or rather, that was, it made more sense to do that. There's
very smart.
Yeah. There was, show people everything. That was sort of the Hammer ethos. I mean, it was, when they did Twins of Evil, they got actual Playboy centerfold twins. Characters.
That's incredible.
Like, they really they
have to watch that one.
You paid for. That was the Hammer ethos, is give them their money's worth.
Well,
you've got the blood and the heaving cleavage and the bodice is ripping and all this. It's all right there. It's very present.
And honestly, seeing them kind of just throw everything into this, and seeing them obviously try to appeal to everyone's lizard brain side, as you've said so far, and at the same time trying so many different kind of genre dynamics, the fact that this works actually kind of blows my mind as I was watching it.
Yeah.
Because there's every single,
This could come
scene,
off
there's
as
something
super silly
there's
very
something
easily.
that threatens to break it, and for some reason it entirely holds together for me, and I'm watching it and I was getting swept up. There's really creepy images of I'm thinking very early on there's one where a girl enters a church and there's this big shadow of a cross basically framed up against the wall, and as she's walking in, the cross starts to move. It starts to like bend downward, and then immediately it cuts to a thing of wine being knocked over onto a table and a girl screaming. And again, it's a very formally interesting and psychological way to capture the idea that there's a freaking life-draining vampire going around killing people. And I was just I was very impressed by this thing, both by Clemens's directing for a first-time director and I guess an only-time director. I honestly kind of wished that he made more movies, because I was like, obviously this has the Hammer. The budgets and the sets and the costumes that Hammer would have pulled, but there is something that does feel uniquely Clemens in both the writing and directing here.
Yes. That's the sort of iconography that he comes up with here is very, very specific to the kind of thing that he was very good at doing, which is this sort of serialized, very, very instantly recognizable good v evil struggle. I mean, he was just good at this stuff. He'd done it for years. He understood it. He knew exactly what he was doing. It's just essentially that he was telling a story that was maybe 10 years past its freshness date vis-a-vis the approval of British audiences. His sons are on Twitter. They're Twitter friends of mine, and we talk about Captain Kronos sometimes. And I just think it's a fucking brilliant idea, and I really wish they had been given a chance to kind of see it through, because he knew exactly the elements with which he was playing. I mean, he got it. He really did understand.
Yeah, and not only that, he's also playing around hugely in ways that I think that a lot of people could take lessons from. Because even when of
Hammer handing him all this money was, I mean, that's not incorrect that they came to him and said, do what you're going to do. They said that because they trusted him, because everybody in Britain trusted Brian Clemens. I mean,
blows my mind that this didn't work for
most
people
bona
on
fide
any
hits,
level.
Yeah.
You know?
Like, how did nobody come out to see this? Like, that just kind of like blows my mind.
And I love that it even mixes comedy. Like, they have that great scene where I think the girl and Kronos are introduced, and she's like I'll have you or whatever, and he's like, oh, I'll have you, and then it like zooms into his
will
face.
You have me or whatever?
Yeah, will you have me? Because it's just like, will you have me over for, I don't know, dinner or something like that, and then he's like, oh, I'll have you, and it like zooms in and everything.
Well, and one of my favorite bits that he shoots is the actual love scene itself, which is where sort of, you know, they got the bodice going. She's stripping. It's very lusciously lit with all of these deep shadows on it, and she's walking forward, and he does a split diopter shot of like his cigarello or whatever that he has as she's like strutting forward.
Blunt, it's like, oh, Kronos is smoking that blunt.
And then he switches to matching zoom cuts on their faces, where it's zooming in on her face, then his face, then her lips and his lips, with this like really sort of like lusciously lit shadows and stuff. And I was
showing
like,
you that passion.
And I was like, I don't know if that relationship worked for me in writing, but the filmmaking sold me on it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's exactly it. It's like the imagery just kind of showed, like the direction sold you on it. Because you're right, it doesn't really get too deep themselves, like as characters. They don't really communicate a lot in the sense where you would think that
it seems like he's trying to fit a lot into a small amount of time.
Yeah, very much. Well, the Hammer thing was they wouldn't let you make a movie longer than like 96 minutes. That was like, he had a lot of constraints in theory, which was you had to do all this at the normal, because again, they were making movies for, like your podcast, a 2-picture format. You couldn't keep people at their cars longer than 95 minutes because there was another movie that had to be shown a lot of the time. Yeah. I mean, Hammer was famous for that. There were talk of they would make movies with the same ending and then send them out on different bills so that you wouldn't know you were being shown the same movie. But once or twice they accidentally sent like Rasputin the Mad Monk and Taste the Blood of Dracula out on the same bill by accident, and they had the same ending, and people were furious. Which is Christopher Lee being killed on an ice floe. But that's very much, that was exactly. I mean, Carolyn Monroe. She was a Bond girl twice over. She's in The Golden Voyage of
no surprise.
Sinbad. She's in a number of Hammer horrors. Still working, by the way, Carolyn Monroe. She was in Maniac and Star Crash, the absolute legend. Carolyn Monroe still making movies to this day.
That's amazing.
So if people weren't willing to show up for a vampire movie starring Carolyn Monroe, there was something more wrong with the formula than simply that I don't know. There was something deeply wrong at the heart of the British movie-going public, that they were just vampired out. They couldn't do this again. Because there's nothing inherently wrong with Captain Kronos. I think that Captain Kronos is a great idea with a great, cast and budget and production. I think it's beautiful and interesting and exciting.
Oh,
and
I love that interaction at the bar that he has with the other dudes who are just awful. Because the dude gets introduced lighting a match on the wall. He abuses the prostitute that he just had for the night. And then he starts pulling a sword on just a patron who's unhappy with how he treated the prostitute.
Which anyone that's decent would.
This
be.
dude's just going off. And Kronos comes in, and Kronos is completely willing to just he's like, all right, let's chill out, don't be an asshole. And then the dude insults his hunchback friend, and then
he fucking murders him.
Yeah, he murders him and his friends.
2 swipes.
Yeah, and he's just swish, swish, and it's cut to the sword going, cut to the wall being sprayed with blood, and then cut to the sword again, and then it's just back, and all the guys just kind of fall over.
I love the direction of 2 fall at the same time, and then the one guy's just am I cut?
Did I get hit?
Here we go.
Falling over, hitting the table.
Great.
Yeah, there's a really good timing to it and everything.
Yeah. Do you think that, just speaking on the fact that people didn't really come to this one, maybe because they were sick of vampire movies, do you think it was just a matter of they saw that it was a vampire movie and they went, no? Because I feel like if they saw it, they'd realize that they actually revamped the vampire a little bit, making them old instead of just another vampire and so forth.
The thing also is that word of mouth was different, and I think that Captain Kronos probably skewed in its word of mouth younger. That it's a guy with a sword fighting vampires. I mean, by the 70s, you think about what was going on in English cinema at that point. You had Mike Hodges making Get Carter, and there was this turn dark as there was in America. We got to talk about
that on the show, by the way. That's the Michael Caine one, right? Get Carter?
That's correct. Yeah, that's right.
Oh, okay.
And there was, I don't know, there were suddenly 10,000 things you could do that you couldn't have done a decade ago because the censors had relaxed or vanished in some cases. And so suddenly you've got films that are dealing with addiction and sex work. And, I don't know, I just don't think that something as inherently sort of pulpy as Captain Kronos in 1974.
But dealing with adult themes and very clearly targeting adults instead of kids. I got you.
I feel you.
That makes sense to me.
It was very much, it was a movie for preteens at that point. That was how it should have marketed. But I think that Hammer didn't update their marketing strategy. They still thought they were talking to everybody as opposed to just a handful of people.
I could definitely see middle-aged people being a swashbuckling detective.
Stupid. Yeah. It's Sherlock Holmes with a sword. I think that would only appeal to a handful of people at that point. I mean, by then, this is very okay.
They were we got people like Scorsese making movies right now. Are you gonna try and get me with a swashbuckling?
I'm gonna go see Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
So the Stephen Frears film, A Very English Scandal, that just came out, right?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing with sexuality being on the front page of every newspaper, I think really did change the British audience's perception of fiction, that it had this kind of evolve. I mean, you've got people like Basil Dearden who made issue movies in the 60s, so that by the time people are looking to take their mind off of the craziness of the world, I think they needed something a little more sophisticated, at least on paper, than what Captain Kronos is. Captain Kronos is not a sophisticated idea. It's a guy with a sword fighting vampires. It's not,
it does feel very comic
book.
It does. Well, it feels like
even the tone.
For me, it felt like just a very pulpy vampire novel, which honestly, I really loved that about it, and I wished. And sitting there watching it, I was like, man, they didn't make sequels to this. I was sitting there actually being
fucking tell me about it. I would love nothing more. If a fucking genie dropped 10 grand on my stoop, I would make
Captain Kronos.
I would make a Captain Kronos sequel. It's been my lifelong dream to make a Captain Kronos sequel because I think the idea is so wonderful, and I think you could, if you handed that idea to 10 directors, they'd make a different but equally great movie.
Yeah, and I like the one that Clemens works here with the giant sort of like castle on the hill and the sort of the
it's this great classicist idea. It's you've got these inbred siblings, who
and you think it's them the entire movie because they're so young and they're very pretty and they're very suspicious.
Shane Bryant, the prettiest actor Hammer ever worked with.
Yep,
that was. Hammer tried
and they
so
seem
hard.
very
Hammer
vain.
Everything, and they tried to make Shane Bryant a star. They tried to make what's his name, Ralph Bates a star. Ralph Bates, one of the most ugly men in the British cinema canon. They tried everything to like hang on. They really thought that it was, first of all, Hammer never understood what they had in their female sidekicks. They always tried to make the movies based on men because Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing were their cash cows for so many years, and they never got around to the idea.
Well, I will say that I think Carolyn Monroe holds herself a little better here than Horst Janssen.
Yes, I agree.
Who is Captain Kronos? Who I do think he's got the look. I don't know about
he doesn't have the acting chops.
No,
that's for sure.
No,
and he does have a charm to him a little bit. Maybe it's because it works for the pulpiness of this film.
But he's not charismatic. I don't know. There's something missing for sure.
Yeah,
because it did work for me watching the movie. I got a lot of kick out of him, but I definitely
he still gave me a charm. But I agree that he's not the most technically proficient.
And I mean, I guess just in comparison to her, it's like she's like lightning on screen when you're watching her.
For sure.
And I was like, damn,
even with her subtle role,
kill a vampire.
She doesn't have a huge role really, in the sense of like he gets to be outlandish and whatever, but she still comes off as the more skilled.
He gets all the great outfits. He gets like 2 different kinds of swords.
Yeah, exactly.
And when they get to the big castle finale, like all of the characters are kind of like frozen like statues, and he's just like walking around through them with his big sword, fighting a old vampire.
He's just as immobile as everybody frozen by the spell.
Oh yeah,
his facial muscles do not move in this movie.
That's for damn sure.
But there's a lot of great sets and stuff here, like the hillside cemetery.
Yeah, totally.
which looks awesome. I think that the fight choreography maybe could have been gotten a little bit push there.
Yeah, I do. I will say though that
the
I was
fight
surprised.
in the castle is good.
Oh, okay. Wait. So what fight were you talking about?
The one on the hillside.
Is that
where he's fighting like 4
all the
people?
guys,
right,
all the villagers?
Right. I agree with you there. Because
the one at the end where it's more of a power dynamic thing than it is an actual sword fight, and it's more of like a he kind of sees the people who are frozen around him, and he's trying to like mobilize them basically. He's trying to awaken them. He kind of like finishes off because the main detective mystery, I guess, ends with the idea that it's not the rich kids, it's the rich parents who everyone thought was dead or old or dying. Basically, they've actually been wearing little like masks to look old and actually draining the life out of everyone to live forever, and even their kids are a little shocked about it.
And then you get like a good 10-minute action sequence.
You get a good 10-minute action sequence inside the castle that they've kind of previously set up visually, and which
is very good. I was surprised.
It's a good sequence.
I was just, because the movie's very subtle with all its like fighting and violence. I wasn't expecting such a big finale.
It's very clear that they saved budget for that sequence, especially when he puts the sword through the dad.
That was sweet.
And the dad's walking towards him just with a sword inside of him and through his stomach. And then he like slits his throat, and then the mom is like crying blood, and they both kind of like collapse into like a pile of skeletons that are like embracing each other. And I'm like, this imagery is amazing.
Yeah.
Well, that was exactly the thing, is that on paper, this movie should have been a huge goddamn success. It was everything that people wanted. You had something for everybody.
Yeah, it's awesome, and there's tons of little details. One of my favorite ones is one where Kronos, who's constantly walking in on dead bodies that he's trying to like save. Lots of people die. He's not the best lifesaver. He does solve the mystery though, so that's good. But he doesn't save a lot of people.
Lets a lot of lives go in the process.
But there's one bit
he's
where
a better detective than he is an angel of mercy.
Because there's lots of shots of like blood kind of like dripping on things and sliding down things. There's one earlier where the giant church bell has like blood all over it. But there's one where blood gets on a lamp. and it starts like pouring down the lamp, and as Cronus enters to go find out what happened to this person, the entire room is lit purple, and that's because the lamp, having the blood around it, is actually being lit by the blood, which is just like
that's very awesome.
You know, and I'm like, come on, man.
Yeah.
Like, who, like, to have that sort of attention, and again, the kind of feeling that lighting gives you in that particular scene where Cronus, even though, you know, we've talked about not necessarily the most evocative, emotional performer, he comes in, and the lighting does it for him. He's fucking sad.
Well, that's the thing. I feel like the direction and just everything surrounding him makes him decent.
Makes him, well,
at
yeah,
least,
it makes everybody look good, which honestly is kind of like what the goal should be as a collaborative form for film.
Oh, for
you
sure,
should be trying to make everybody look great,
even if they're not quite technically there.
Yeah. And yeah, I was honestly kind of blown away by this movie, so thanks for bringing it. I think we're gonna have to enter the reductive rating round on this one, and we'll let you get in a couple more points as we do that. But for me, Captain Kronos was honestly a pretty easy 4. I honestly really loved it. I was watching it and I was like, this is an amazing premise. There's a lot of great genre mashing happening here. It's very stylishly and formally done. I think that Clemens, for a first-time director, shows real chops as a director, and I mean the fact that he was a writer shows that he had attention to film and character before anyway.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was pretty just, you know, it was a vampire movie with a katana and some swashbuckling and some detective stories and some amazing imagery. And yeah, I loved it.
Awesome.
I also give it at least a 4, maybe a high 3, 4. Let me ask you guys this before we take our leave of the subject. Mm-hmm. If we're making Captain Kronos today, who would y'all cast as Captain Kronos?
Chris Hemsworth.
Oh, nice. That's a good answer.
Didn't even have to think about it.
That's a good answer.
That's a great one. That's a great answer.
Because I kind of feel that, like, because he was in that movie and I wasn't a huge fan of it. That like Wild the Hunter, whatever. It was like a Snow White thing or something.
Oh, Snow White and the Huntsman or whatever.
And I feel like if you just took him doing that and put him into Captain Kronos, it'd be dope as hell.
Oh yeah. Well, he looks like he would look good in a period piece, and if he and if you put that sort of like that sort of puffy collared shirt, but with like the chest open and stuff like that, you know.
I have also Nick Cage. But that's just for me. That's just because I want to see that really badly. I'm fucking Nick Cage just Captain Kronos. Oh my god, it'd be a totally different film, but it'd be great for me.
This needs to get made.
Yep.
Scout, we're counting on you here.
Yeah.
Either
one of those guys will be great.
So I can do that. I mean, I would love to do. I would do like 2 Captain Kronos a year with a different actor in the lead role every time, just to have fun with it. I think
that'd be awesome. And you don't even acknowledge that it's maybe in a different universe. It's just every single time Kronos is different, and it moves on from there.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
That's great.
Oh man.
All right, so you said 4.
Yeah, you said 4.
Cool. All right. You know what? When I first watched it, I did give it the 3. Mm-hmm. It was higher than Satan's Claw. This one it stuck with me a little more. I really enjoyed the comedy thrown in there, but then it had some like you said, some great imagery that was well directed and thought out.
Yeah, we didn't even get to talk about the scene where they're testing how to kill this particular vampire, because I think you wanted to mention that before.
Right, yes. Yeah, I can do that now. It's got that great shot where it's just showing they tie him to a chair and they're hanging him to see if they can hang him to kill him. Right. And they just zoom out of the window and you just see the shadow come up, and it almost gives a more violent feel to it. Yeah. And I loved that shot.
Again, it is sort of like an imaginative imagery that really carries you with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think I'm going to end up giving it the 4.
Nice.
I got to change that on Letterboxd, I guess.
Yeah, you gotta go back.
But I think after this conversation, I feel like I'm getting more out of the film now, and I'm gonna give it a 4.
It's so rich. I don't know. There's
just so much to it.
Yeah,
it's just so interesting because I don't think that
just as you're watching it, I was a little like, "What am I fucking watching? Holy shit!"
Yeah,
because it threw me off a bit. But now I'm focused, and
there's so much squished in to it, and the fact that he just manages to get all these really great visual touches, and he does like time stopping and like zooming into cloaks and like just all kinds of craziness that he manages to fit in.
It's a very dynamic movie, and I think
it's 90 minutes. What the hell?
It's 90 minutes. I mean, it's in and done like that, and I think
movies.
that as with so many of these things, the initial burn kind of scared them off of ever trying again, which is a shame because there's clearly so much there. But yeah, no, I mean that happens all the time. Is that somebody who is adjacent to the film industry tries their hand at directing for the first time. It happened with Albert Finney. It happened with there's a zillion examples of this, of people who really pour all their energy into a movie and people don't take to it, and that's it. That's all they need to sort of stay away from it.
It's really sad. Have you made an Unloved about Captain Kronos?
I have not made an Unloved about Captain Kronos. I've been flirting with the idea of doing a video essay series on all of the weird Hammer movies I love, because there are so many of them. It was the reason that I had to do Danger Mouse for all the weirdo Disney movies, because if I let Disney into the unloved pool anymore, I would just do all Disney.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to probably wind up doing something about the Hammer movies I really enjoy, because there's so many of them. I mean, These Are the Damned, and that was the great Joseph Losey's sort of atomic horror movie. And Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed is a great one. Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, Demons of the Mind. There are more great unsung Hammer films than I can count on one hand, so I'd love a chance to talk about any of them. Nice. So thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to scream about.
Thank you for bringing them on. I guess that'll wrap it up for this week's show. That was The Blood on Satan's Claw and Captain Kronos. Scout, thanks so much for coming on and bringing these two films. I really enjoyed both of them. Scout, this is the part of the show where if you've got anything to plug, now's the time to do it. I think we already plugged it a couple times, but Scout's Unloved series.
Yeah, okay. So every month on the first of the month or thereabouts, depending on scheduling, I do the Unloved on RogerEbert.com, which is movies that were supposed to be big but weren't. I have a Patreon, patreon.com/honorszombie. You can find me on Twitter on honors_zombie. And on Honors Zombie, I do a bunch of video essay series. I do Danger Mouse about weirdo Disney movies. I do Dad Rock about 90s action movies. I do Murderer's Row about character actors. There's a million ideas that I'm really happy to finally get a chance to do. You can find a couple of my movies on Amazon Prime: House of Little Deaths, Your Silent Face, Diana, and Enjoy Your Trip to Hell. If you are interested in weirdo genre films, definitely check those out.
For you, Jamie, he actually recently did an Unloved on Silent Hill.
Oh, that. I would love to listen to that. I definitely.
Oh, you gotta check it out, man. Tell me what you think.
I feel like that is an underrated movie. That's cool. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out.
I love Silent Hill. I watched it again, in preparation for the essay, and just fell in love with it all over again. I think Silent.
The imagery in that movie is unbelievable, and I love that they stay true to the game.
I need to watch it. I think I watched it once when I was in like the 9th grade, and I don't think I've seen it since.
It's much better.
You gotta check it out again, man. It's really good.
Yeah. Gotta do it.
Yeah. It's a decent video game movie for once.
There you go.
That and Tomb Raider are the only good video game movies. I think it was basically.
Oh, you like the one with Angelina Jolie?
No.
Is he talking about the new one? Maybe.
Oh, you like the new one?
Yeah, I love the new one.
Oh, okay.
We loved the new one.
Oh, damn. I'm gonna have to watch it because I've heard mixed things. I've heard back and forth, but I'm a big fan of the game, the one that it's based on, and so yeah, I'm gonna have to give it a go.
Well, if you gave Jean Roland $20 million and a Hollywood effects crew, I think he would have made something very similar to the Silent Hill movie we have.
Oh, okay, cool.
I think you guys are going to run into Jean Roland quite a bit doing this podcast, because he made some of the most famous kind of sleaze movies ever. He made Shiver of the Vampire and Fascination and Demoniacs and Grapes of Death. The guy was
We're definitely going to mention him a couple times, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So look out for him.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on and bringing all this info with you.
Yeah, man.
This is awesome.
We're going to wrap it up for this week, but next week, for patrons, we're going to be talking Abel Ferrara's Miss 45.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be pairing it with Street Trash.
Oh man,
this was a request episode by one of our
movie.
patrons, Steve Carlson, who initially wanted, I think, to be the Driller Killer, and Street Trash, but he also put in brackets Miss 45, and it just so happened we've already talked about Driller Killer in conjunction with Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because I think between all these films, if we could repair, having watched them all, I would have put Driller Killer and Street Trash together, and I would have put Taxi Driver and Miss 45
100%. 100%. What are you going to do?
But either way, next week, we're going to be talking Miss 45, and we're going to be talking Street Trash. And then 2 weeks from now, we're going to have a special guest on, and he is going to be bringing with him...
Yeah, I forgot this one.
1977, I think. Hausu?
Oh, is it Japanese or Chinese?
One of the more...
Kobayashi.
Yes,
I've heard nothing
more of the
but
acclaimed J-horror films.
things.
So we're going to be talking about House, and we're going to be pairing it with David Lynch's Eraserhead.
What a fucking... I'm excited for that double feature.
Yeah, I recently picked up both
one.
the Criterions and the Criterion Cell for them, and the guest picked them, and I was like, look, I'm not going to complain.
Yeah,
They're both,
hell yeah.
I got them. So
That's sweet.
So that's what we're going to be talking about in 2 weeks' time for you guys, free listeners. But I think that's going to be it for this week. So thanks everyone for listening. As always, if you're listening on iTunes, go rate us and stuff. If you want all those Patreon episodes, go on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. And that's basically it. Other than that, just keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.